Hello everyone. If you haven't learned by now, I'm a really big fan of personal finance. By having good personal finance, I can rest assured that I can pay my bills, and I know that if I have any extra money, I can spend it on whatever I want. It also allows me to sleep well at night and not cringe when the food bill is more than I expected. With good finances, I know that unexpected expenses are actually somewhat accounted for. For many, one of the biggest problems of personal finance is that each month they have different expenses. Some months' expenses are minimal, and they can spend their extra money on things that they want. Other months, they happen to have more expensive bills, such as the next 6 months of car insurance or the cost of a new phone or car. Oftentimes, people who haven't prepared well end up having to put things on credit card or borrow from family or take out loans in order to pay those bills. I like to compare month-to-month finances to sailing a ship on the open seas. Sometimes the ocean is calm and the sailing is easy, and sometimes, well, the ocean breaks beyond its barriers. So the big question is how to prepare for those big waves. The great thing about personal finance, which is different from sailing on the open sea, is that you can, for the most part, control the majority of expenses, and the decisions on when to pay them and how to pay them is largely up to you, if you prepare in advance. Let me give you an example. Let's say that John and Christy have a car insurance bill, which is $400 every 6 months. If John and Christy only bring in $2,000 every month, and they still have to pay their rent, electricity, health insurance, cell phone bill, gas, food, etc., you can see how difficult it would be to come up with the $400 to pay the car insurance bill. The funny thing is, companies have figured out that oftentimes it is difficult for people to pay everything up front, and so they can charge you a little bit extra or let you make payments. Or sometimes they will phrase it differently, and simply give you a discount for paying everything up front. Either way, there's money to be saved by being prepared. Not only are you in a position to bargain, but you don't have to pay the outrageous credit card expenses. Let me show you a budgeting system that I came up with when I was at BYU. This is a good budget for someone with simple expenses. The most important thing for me when I was at BYU was getting into medical school. So I figured that if I could only stretch my money into the fall and summer semesters without losing it all, then I could sometimes get by without working or working too much, which would then allow me to study more. So what I would do is pay all my rent, so we can see right here, summer savings, rent, my tuition, my health insurance, pay all that stuff up front, and then what I did is have this bank send an automatic payment once a week to my Capital One 360 account. So basically I was working on an abbreviated budget, being a week long. If I happened to spend all the money for 1 week, it wasn't the end of the world because the next week I would receive a new deposit. I was in essence paying myself. I decided how much and when. I was in control of my budget. I've heard some people complain about how their budget is every 15 days or sometimes once a month, and they prefer one over the other. If only they would learn that they could accumulate the money from their income in one bank account, they could pay themselves however they like. They could pay themselves every day if they wanted to. It's just divided up into smaller amounts. The problem with this first budget was that I had a hard time saving for long-term expenses, for example, clothes. When I went shopping for clothes, I was so out of date and behind that I had to spend a couple $100s to make any headway. When medical school started and I had a little bit bigger budget, I realized that if I could save a little bit every month in an electronic envelope, then whenever I wanted to go shopping for clothes, I could just take the accumulated amount of money. This is key to what I was explaining earlier, taking the large expenses and saving up for them beforehand. In a previous generation, people used to use envelopes, and some people still do today. But I find that harder to do with credit cards and all of our electronic payments. I went in search of a bank which offered multiple savings accounts. When I did, I found Capital One 360. The great thing was I could make as many savings accounts as I wanted, give them unique nicknames, and set up automatic payments. In accounting, they call this accruing for an expense or something like that. It's a really simple idea, but sometimes it takes a little bit of know-how when it comes to the technology in order to figure it out. This bank has made it really easy. This bank, and I'm sure others, but this is the one that I happen to be using. Let's go ahead and take a look at a budget which includes two more principles, and that is having a budget, and saving a couple months money saved ahead of time. So we've talked about all these principles. Now let's go ahead and put them all together. So up here we have the person, the construction worker, who's making money. What he does is he makes that money and he's going to put it into one of his bank accounts. What Dave Ramsey has always recommended is that you have at least a couple months of savings in reserve. And I think not only Dave Ramsey has recommended that, but I think that we've been recommended that by the church and by the prophets as well. So by having a couple months in reserve, then you can be prepared for unexpected expenses. That's one way. For example, losing your job. So ideally what you do is you take a certain percentage of that, and before you even sent it to the bank in which you used to spend money, you would set aside a certain percentage. I was able to do this before I got married, and I will be able to do this once we start residency. Setting aside a certain percentage of my money. So once a month, what we do is we send the money from the one bank account and we send it to our Capital One 360 that I talked about before. Again, there may be different banks available, but this happens to be the one that I use, as I like the way they have things set up and they allow you to make multiple savings accounts. Once a month, the money comes into the checking account. From the checking account, automatic payments are made to health insurance, your mortgage or your rent, or tithing and fast offering. And then what you do with the remaining amount of money is you put them into their envelopes. As we can see, we have an envelope or a savings account for gas. One for food, one for dates, one for utilities, one for allowance, and maybe one for John, maybe one for Christy, Christmas, car insurance, new phone, new car. Again, these are not necessarily the accounts that I have, but they're just examples. It is also possible to withdraw from these accounts by outside entities. For example, your utilities company. Generally, you have a good idea on how much that's going to be every month. What you could do is you could automatically put in, let's say your utilities bill is less than $100. So you put in $110 every month. And your utilities company can withdraw it from that one savings account. You always have extra money in that utilities account. If, for example, one month it happens to be a lot more than any other, you've accrued money in there to take care of that. And if for some reason you've been able to save up a lot of money in your utilities bill and you decide to buy a new refrigerator or whatever you like, you will have money saved up in that to do so. These green ones represent things that are most likely spent on a monthly basis. And we will talk about how you actually spend that money. Allowances tend to be things that can be spent on either a monthly or less frequently basis. And the red ones tend to be things, accounts in which you will put money in every month, but in which you will take money out very infrequently. A new phone, you may pull it out only once every 2 years. A new car, possibly much less than that. Christmas, once a year, and car insurance perhaps every 6 months. But remember, you will get a discount by having that saved up. So how do you spend this money? Well, we talked about the principle of, let's look at some of the principles we have here. We talked about the principle of having money in reserve. Now and we've talked about the principle of accruing money for future expenses. Now let's look at the principle of having a budget. A great online program is Mint. And Mint, what Mint does is you can put in your credit card or your debit card information and it will track your expenses. You can set a budget up. It's very user-friendly. And when you purchase something, for example, at Walmart, then a couple days later to a couple hours later, depending on how fast it occurs, that will show up on your Mint account and you can categorize it into one of your budgets. A good way of doing this is to have different categories of expenses on your budget that are associated with each one of these right here. Most importantly, the monthly expenses. So what you do is you spend the money on your credit card. This Freedom Chase is a great example because you can accrue a large amount, percentage of return on this, up to 1 to 5% as an example. And you watch your credit card using Mint. You go on it every couple days and you make sure that you're on track with your budget. And then what you do at the end of the month is you take a look at how much money you spent on your budget. Of course, you still have to follow a budget. And then you transfer money from your envelopes into the checking account. And this will have been accumulated because you're transferring this money to here based on how much money you spent on your credit card, watching it with your Mint. You're going to, once you've taken that money that you spent from the accounts from which they are designated, you put it into your checking account, then you pay off your credit card. Then every once in a while you'll have a large expense, and this is when we come back to the previous discussion of the large waves. That would be, for example, car insurance, a new phone or a new car. And these red ones are ideal in accruing the money that you need. This is a wonderful budget system. It's quite complicated and takes time to set up, but you could start out with something more like this and then slowly develop a more complicated plan. The amazing thing about having everything automated is you don't have to worry about it. It's one less thing you have to do. We spend about 30 minutes on finances every month, and it takes a little bit of time to sit back and look at everything that's going on. But once we've done so, then we can rest assured that we get to rest assured the rest of the month, or the next month, that we will have everything paid for and that we're living off no debt. This is a wonderful way of doing things, and everyone has their own way of doing it, but I've enjoyed this and it's been quite successful for us.